Over the years, we've seen a lot of movies and a lot of biopics, and all too many times, biopics come out and they have a great cast and there's a lot of money put into it, but the story's vanilla, and that doesn't make sense to me when it comes from a very exciting or a very historical moment. You have so many movies out there with people from musicians to actors, authors, political figures, that there's something to be said. There's a moment in history, or there's a moment of their rise to power, or a really phenomenal story about their childhood, and it gets washed to the side and turns more into a massive over budget reenactment or somebody that does a really good impression of the person they're playing. It's not to say that there hasn't been some really good ones and entertaining ones, and it's not to say that there hasn't been some really stellar performances in biopics over the years, and I'm always drawn to them, but I'm always optimistically cautious about these. And last night I watched Sydney Sweeney on HBO MAX in the movie Christy. I've heard a lot of things about it, both bad and worse and not so good, and I had to see for myself. Now, Sweeney stars as boxer Christy Salters Martin. And if you're not familiar with this story, like I wasn't, I was vaguely familiar with who she was. I was vaguely familiar with the story behind it. I kind of went in blind. And it looks at a woman who's struggling with her identity, coming in from a home that really kind of shuns her for who she is. It shuns her for not being the typical woman where I'm going to go out and get a good job and meet a man. But instead, she's going to be a little quote-unquote tomboyish, and she's going to be in love with a female. And at a time where that was frowned upon, or I should say an area that was frowned upon, she is really kind of verbally abused by her mother and ignored. And she stumbles into the world of boxing. And she's immediately groomed and taken advantage of by her trainer. John Salters completely manipulates her, controls her, dictates what she does, hides her inner emotions, verbally and physically abuses her while he trains her and gets her to depend on him only. This movie's about identity. This movie's about being who you are. This movie's about dealing with demons and struggles, family, and rising to the top. And there's a lot of good that comes from this movie. Matter of fact, there's some really good performances. We're just not seeing them very often. Merritt Wever, who plays Christy's mom, gives us one of those performances. And there's some emotional scenes even given by Sydney towards the end of the film. But overall, this movie just kind of is there. It's unfortunate because the story about Christy is extraordinary. But I feel like they glaze over so much just to give us all of that towards the end of the film. They give us a really deep dive and a really crucial dialogue and moments at the end, which are very important, but it doesn't give us a lot of look leading up to that. It looks at the boxing element, but glazes over some of the other stuff and feels very just kind of boring in there, and that was not the story of Christy. I don't think that Sydney Sweeney was the right choice, although I think that she probably gave it her best, but it didn't feel right. It looked off. It felt off. And not because she was doing something different. It's just because this was out of range for her. And that's just the way it is. Although she gave us a really good last 30, 40 minutes of the film, this was not the choice for her. And I think ultimately the movie suffered. This was not an Oscar contender. This was not Sydney's splash into Hollywood. This was just a moment that they thought would work, and it didn't. Overall, I think the story had some pieces there, or I should say the movie had some pieces put together, but they really missed the boat on this. And this is another example of a biopic that just didn't finish.